All right, let's jump right in. Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a pretty intense, honestly radical thesis by an author named Shui Fang, which was translated by Treasure. The title alone sets a seriously heavy stage. It was we who sold our own liberty. Now, if you're looking to challenge your fundamental understanding of personal freedom, well, you're in the right place. We're going to walk through this author's argument together, and spoiler alert, it literally flips everything we think we know about being free completely upside down. Okay, let's dive into this with a quote you'll probably recognize. Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Give me liberty or give me death. Now, that's from the historical figure Patrick Henry, right? The source text kicks things off by establishing this absolute baseline. Liberty is supreme. It is completely, absolutely priceless. Before the author goes on to deconstruct our modern lives, he first cements this core idea that freedom is the greatest wealth any life could possibly possess. But, to understand how we actually lose our freedom, we first have to define what it really is. And the text defines liberty in a very precise, almost absolute way. It says liberty is the infinite power of a life to use its eyes, ears, nose, body, mind, and tongue, while acting with desire, but never overstepping it. The author breaks this down super literally. Seeing what you want to see, that's the liberty of the eyes. Going where you want, liberty of the body. Thinking and saying what you want, that is the liberty of your mind and soul. It's this all-encompassing, absolute physical and mental autonomy. And the stakes for holding on to this absolute autonomy? Well, they could not be higher. The author makes a really stark comparison here. More liberty equals a state closer to heaven, while less liberty equals a state closer to hell. According to the text, losing your liberty isn't just, some minor inconvenience. It is directly equated to losing your very life. On the flip side, gaining liberty is gaining life. The text makes it crystal clear. The degree of freedom you have directly dictates the level of existence you're currently experiencing. Which brings us to the ultimate question, and honestly, the major pivot in this whole argument. Why do we not have liberty? Just look around us. The text argues that most people are simply not completely free. They rarely keep their liberty in full. So if freedom is our greatest wealth, why on earth are we living without it? Well, here is a controversial plot twist the source presents. Ready? No one actually comes and forcefully steals it from us. Nope. Instead, human beings voluntarily sell their own freedom. Crazy, right? Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the author structures this self-inflicted loss. He frames it as a transaction. We are actively selling our freedom through three primary channels: culture, morality, and mechanism. The text argues that day by day, choice by choice, we're out here trading our infinite power in exchange for societal structures. It's like a giant invisible marketplace. So let's break down exactly how this transaction works, starting with that very first channel. Take traditional cultural norms, for instance. The author views these as literal contracts of surrender. Society says, hey, marry when grown, right? Well, the author posits that the second you step into marriage, you sell your liberty to that marriage. Culture dictates never travel far from parents, and suddenly your physical body has no liberty to roam. Culture tells you to love your nation, and just like that, the argument goes, your freedom is sold to the nation. Simply participating in these deeply ingrained cultural norms is, in this specific view, a direct one-to-one trade-off for your personal freedom. Moving right along to the second channel, we have morality. Now, the text argues that we actually sell our liberty to our own values and beliefs, effectively turning them into cages. The author points out that political party loyalists and strict religionists are stark examples of this. They are essentially kidnapped by their own morality. But it's not just religion or politics. The source even argues that if you sell your liberty to the belief of evolution, adopting doctrines like survival of the fittest or the law of the jungle, you essentially make life a fight to the death. When winners are kings and losers are gangsters becomes your daily creed, true liberty just vanishes. Your belief system itself becomes the cage holding you in. So let me ask you a quick question. Have you ever signed a contract? Or actually, scratch that. Maybe you just scrolled to the bottom of a massive software update and hit agree without reading a single word. Well, according to the text, you've engaged in the third channel, mechanisms. These are the rules and structures we consciously set up to restrict ourselves. We're talking constitutions, laws, contracts, the state itself, and yep, there it is again, marriage, families. The author argues that the state is just a mechanism, and by believing in it, you sell your liberty to it. When we consciously enter into a contract or a binding family structure, we're willingly setting up boundaries that tie our own hands. As the text puts it, if we feel unfree today, we have absolutely no excuse to complain. We sold the house, and now we have nowhere to sleep. But listen, it's not just the big, heavy societal structures doing this. The text also outlines a series of small channels where liberty gets lost on a much more personal, psychological level. These include negative inner emotions, jealousy, blaming, comparing, desire, and fear. The author explains that indulging in these inner anxieties or, constantly chasing money, power, fame, and lust heavily restricts our freedom. Basically, as long as we're infected with these negative emotions, we are the ones putting our own minds and souls into bondage. We're locking our own doors from the inside. So the crucial point is really centered on one very specific emotion from that list, and that's fear. The text identifies fear as the absolute ultimate tool of restriction. If we fear anything that limits us, we are quite literally selling our liberty to that fear. And the author takes us a step further, zooming out into the political realm. When a country implements terror policies, making people live in fear from morning till night, the population becomes incredibly easy to control. Tracing it back to the source, the text argues the real issue isn't even just that the state is bad. It's that the majority of citizens have willingly sold their liberty to fear, which makes terror the perfect, most efficient management tool for a state to use. So, if the bondage of the individual is totally self-inflicted and the slavery of the masses is caused by this collective surrender we just talked about, what's the solution? Well, the text builds to a really stark, radical climax here. There is only one way out. The answer is absolute. Escape. That's it. The author doesn't suggest reforming the system or getting out to vote to change the laws or even gently adjusting our culture. No, the only logical response to a world where we have voluntarily sold ourselves into cultural, moral, and mechanical slavery is a total, complete breakaway. But where exactly are we supposed to go? The text presents this ultimate binary choice. First, you must escape to a free place on Earth. You basically have to physically and mentally remove yourself entirely from the cages of traditional culture, state mechanisms, and fear. But the author goes even further. If no completely free place actually exists on this Earth, the text states the only remaining option is to escape to heaven. Yeah, that is how absolute this philosophy is. You must reclaim your infinite power no matter the extreme lengths required. Which leaves us with one final pretty heavy challenge. Are you willing to pay the price of true freedom? Or is the comfort of the cage actually worth the cost to you? We've seen how the text argues that everything from our marriages to our national pride, from the contracts we sign to our own internal fears, are all just transactions where we trade away our absolute liberty. It's definitely a radical perspective for sure, but it absolutely forces us to look at our everyday lives differently. The real question isn't who stole your freedom, but rather, what did you buy when you sold it? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this deep dive has given you plenty to reflect on today.